Hello, Vice Chair.
Hey Pat, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
Doing good.
Just as a FYI, we are live on YouTube already.
Okay, perfect. I will patiently wait.
Okay.
Doing a sound check. Pat, can you hear me?
I can hear you if that's the Pat that you're referring to.
Well, at this point, I'll take it from any Pat. Thank you.
And I can hear you too as well, Eric, just to make you feel
Good.
better.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Appreciate that very much.
Just checking the audio from Fisheries. Can we be heard?
Yes, can hear you.
Okay,
Great.
Oops.
About 3 minutes and we'll get started. Oh. No. I Okay, I think we'll get started here. Just a reminder that this is just a work session. There's no official action that will be taken today, but I am going to start this meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance if we can get a flag up. There, oops, all right. I pledge allegiance
allegiance
To the flag of the
of
United States of
States of
America,
America,
and
and
to
and
the
to the
republic
republic
for which
which
it
it
stands,
stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with
with
liberty and
liberty and
justice.
justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Rice and Fisheries for their presentation, and then what we will do is after that, then Clayton Elliott from Trout Unlimited will have 5 minutes, and then Steve Hirata from Walleyes Unlimited will have 5 minutes, and then my hope is there's lots of questions for the presenters after that, so we can get some further information if needed. So Dr. Rice, if you want to go ahead and start out.
Well, good evening, Chair, Commissioners. First of all, thank you for taking the time out of your busy evening schedules for listening to this important topic. To remind everyone, we're going to be focusing on the Missouri River from below Toston Dam to Canyon Ferry Reservoir, talking about the issues there and possible regulation changes. The last time we presented to you on this, you chose at that time not to make action, but you charged us with getting additional information and to come back and present that to you. We're grateful that you decided to do this through a work session, where we have a little bit more time to delve into the subject and answer the questions. So we're going to have a short presentation by the local area biologist, Mr. Ron Spoon. Mr. Spoon has spent almost 35 years working on this stretch of the river. He's got a lot of great insight on this river and has seen the fishery change dramatically over the years. So hopefully you'll take advantage of his expertise here and ask lots of questions. And just to remind everyone of our current process, we're currently going through a review of all of the public comments through our scoping process in order to create a regulation package for all of you to make decision on in October. So that package will be for the 25-26 regulation booklet and will go out publicly in August. So this is sort of post-scoping with the public, along with, I think we had 50, 60 different proposals. And like I say, we're working on putting that final package together that will go public in August. We have two basic goals here tonight. One is to provide the commissioner specifically with a more comprehensive view of this particular stretch of the river and its fishery and the related challenges and issues with it. And secondly, we're hoping to get some direction or insight on development of a proposal for this river section for the package that will go out in August. We have several staff here, both from Region 3 and Region 4. So again, we welcome any questions that you have. And finally, before I hand it over to Mr. Spoon, I wanted to thank Commissioner Brook for spending a good quality day in the Townsend office with us. She was able to get out on the river with Mr. Spoon and his staff, so she got to see this issue firsthand. And we found it very beneficial just to have that extra time talking in detail with the commissioner. So on behalf of the staff, I wanted to make that thank you specifically to Commissioner Brooks. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Ron Spoon, and we'll put up on the screen a very short presentation for you all to view. Yeah, the head shape.
Does that look good for everybody?
Yes, that's great.
Okay, well, Chair Robinson, Commissioners, I'm Ron Spoon, and as Eileen said, I've worked on this stretch of the river since 1990. And I'm going to keep this really brief and at a 30,000 foot layer. There won't be a lot of detail, but I wanted to kind of give you some background about what we've learned about this system and what we think makes it work and when it doesn't work. And so I'm going to describe some things really in a general way with the goal of hoping to just generate questions from you that kind of lead us to getting through this situation that we have with some potential regulation changes. So this is Toston Dam. It's 23 miles above Canyon Ferry Lake. It is built by DNRC as an irrigation diversion. So since about 1939, it's blocked any fish from Canyon Ferry or that system from going upstream. So it's a bona fide fish passage barrier. It's kind of legendary about fishing at the base of that dam in the fall. Large brown trout move up there from the lake, and people historically have fished in that location to catch large Canyon Ferry brown trout. Something really key happened in 1989 when DNRC put a turbine on that dam, started generating electricity. And we, at that point, started bumping up our information gathering. We have a mitigation agreement with DNRC because of fish loss to the turbines. And so anyhow, this is at the upper end of where this regulation situation takes place from Canyon Ferry to Toston Dam. It's a 23-mile reach, really interesting river. Next slide. So again, this is kind of redundant, but it shows you how it relates to Canyon Ferry. That area in yellow is covered under the Upper Missouri Reservoir Plan. So all of that area gets lumped in that plan that's done every 10 years. And so just keep in mind that that's one of the plans that tells us and directs us is encompasses all three lakes and that river. But we also have the statewide plan. And just the one thing in all of our current planning right now, the trout fishery, the wild trout fishery has continued to be an emphasis in that stretch of river. Next slide, please. And one thing that's I wanted to use, there's probably a dozen different species that are affected in that reach, but I'm going to focus on just kind of comparing and contrasting a brown trout fishery and walleye fishery. They're both located in that system right now. They're both non-native. They're both pretty high level predators. But the one thing that is very different about these two species is brown trout have really limited spawning potential. There's a few little springy areas and a few tributaries where they produce virtually all of the young that have to supply that whole system. Very limited spawning habitat. And if we ever wanted to get rid of brown trout, I think I could find 3 or 4 places we could block them off and they would be gone forever. So it's a very different from the walleye situation. Walleye on a western reservoir likes to spawn on gravelly wave wash shoreline with an increasing lake level and warming temperature. And if you were to design that, that would basically be Canyon Ferry Lake. And it's a little different from their native habitats in Wisconsin and other places where with natural lakes, they don't seem to be able to pull off year classes all of the time in those places and they stay in balance. But in a western reservoir, the walleye reproduction basically often overwhelms the system. And when they first came in and we first saw them in 1989, we brought people in from out of state to help us figure out what our options were. And virtually without exception, they warned us that we were going to have more walleye than our forage would be able to sustain. And that's been a struggle ever since. And when I can't remember if I was going to mention this or not, but our first 2 plans were to suppress walleye because of not that they're bad or they're not native. It's just because they were going to be a threat to our forage supply. In 1997, we removed walleye on the spawning areas and created tremendous controversy. And at that point, the walleye advocates really pushed on us hard to say, let the anglers deal with walleye. You guys stay away with your nets. We'll have the anglers try to keep this in check for you. So that's some background that goes back quite a few years, but just thought I would point out the difference between these two non-natives that are both valuable members of the fishery, but they use the system very differently. So our species goals in our current Canyon Ferry management plan, rainbow, we have a numeric goal, brown trout we also do, but the walleye plan is only to monitor them. It's we don't have an objective to either increase their size or their numbers or decrease anything. It's strictly to monitor. And some of our early plans had a prescription of suppression. That's not the case anymore. So it's important to know that there is not a numeric goal for walleye that pushes us to try to reach a certain outcome. Next. One thing that was really valuable in the Bozeman public meeting was I had this graph, but it didn't have the early red dots on it. This is our brown trout abundance, and several people noticed that brown trout are doing just fine according to the second half of this graph. And so why are we concerned? And we did not really adequately convey that what we see now is just a fraction of what that brown trout fishery used to be. So that the Bozeman crowd really helped us understand that was an issue to folks. And we've now added that additional information to provide some context to it. Excuse me. We don't have a numeric goal for walleye in the system, but we do monitor them as the plan directs. And so in the springtime, when they're moving in, you'll see that they started coming in the river about 2015. We had not seen them previously. They hung around about 0.3 to 0.5 fish per minute of sampling until this year. This is brand new information where they basically have just almost doubled, and the size has dropped significantly. And so this is kind of a brand new piece of information that some of the folks may not have seen yet. Excuse me for a second. Excuse me for my cough. I can't talk very much. My grandkids love it. And I've been, but Commissioner Brook came out with us and we sampled. This is just one day of sampling. And when you're just popping down the river with electricity and what comes up, you'll see that 61% of the fish that you catch right now is walleye. You get a few rainbows, a few browns, a couple link here and there, but for a predator to dominate the species composition is a pretty rare thing. Next. And we think they're coming into the river because this is the Canyon Ferry pattern. The red line is walleye numbers in the last 30 years. And their main forage was perch back in those days. When they depleted their forage supply is when they really seemed to start looking for another place. And that's the primary reason we're seeing walleye that move into the river in the spring, and they tend to leave by Halloween. Next. We've done some creel information. I expect quite a few questions on this. I'm only doing one slide just as a primer, so you know we have some creel data. But it's the old thing where very few people catch most of the fish. And of those 283 interviews, over 80% of them caught less than 5 fish. Next. When we sample the river, we do it in at least 3 reaches. This is the lowest one from the Highway 287 bridge down to Canyon Ferry. I just wanted to give you a visual of this, and this is a section Commissioner Brook came out with us on, and it also is a way, a lot of people think that bridge is a handy place to have a regulation boundary. And a lot of people fish right below the bridge or above it, actually move above and below while they're fishing. And it's not a very good regulation boundary. And the lower yellow line is something that maybe if this gets into more discussion, is a possibility to think about. Next. So now I'm switching, that turbine that was put in at Toston Dam resulted in mitigation to try to hang on to some brown trout. We thought brown trout would be the most likely species that was impacted by that turbine when they get passing through it. So we did a project over a decade or two, about $2 million to rewater a system for brown trout to spawn in. This is Deep Creek. And so indeed it is now flowing better than it used to be. I'm just going to show you a couple of things about this project. Next. This is really complex. All you need to know is all the red dotted lines are ditches that used to be, they're gone. And we now have them use alternative water sources. And so that's the basic method of being able to rewater a stream that was severely dewatered. Next. Again, that cost about $2 million to do that over time with a lot of different partners. But fish responded to that project. We see more rainbows being produced. On the far left, that tiny 1-inch fish is this year's rainbow. The little bigger one is a young of the year brown trout. And then the bigger one yet is a yearling rainbow, but that's the kind of fish that are moving out. And we catch them in that little circular trap to count them. Because as I said, the rainbow numbers have recovered quite a bit with water improvements, but the browns are still sort of lingering. Next slide. But now we're seeing walleye move into Deep Creek. And they're actually, adult fish are hard to catch in that thing. It's designed to catch little tiny fish, but we now see walleye, and then for the first time ever saw smallmouth bass moving into our spawning stream. Next. So it brings up sort of a diet discussion. A lot of our public interchange in the last month was that we don't see a lot of trout in the diets that we did. It was only 74 samples last year. Sorry for the gooey picture, but that came out of that smallmouth bass. We cut him open right away. But you know, in the same day that basically it was in that trap, that fish almost is disintegrated. Turns out that's a yearling rainbow. But those really small trout that you see moving through are really hard to identify, and probably more in the unknown category. But we take your point. We don't see a lot of trout in walleye stomachs. At least we didn't last summer. Just want to pose some nuance to that analysis. Next. Now, almost to the end here, we now have a study going on with brown trout again. Again, related to Toston mitigation funds, but we have a graduate student that's putting brown trout that are nosed up below the dam, put 60 radios in the last 2 years to find out where they go and what they're preferring. The highlight of that's probably the Gallatin system. Some of those spring creeks has been a big draw for them. But I won't go into a lot of detail. He's doing also genetic work and other things, but we think that some of this work will help kind of guide our next planning effort on how to keep hold of this wild species into the next planning, which probably is going to start, I'm guessing, in 2028, 2029. So seems like we're always in a pre-planning mode, but again, we're trying to sharpen our pencil a little bit about what we know on what makes brown trout kick. Next slide. And so this is the Broadwater Canal that comes off the Toston Dam. This is the big lifeblood of the county. It also is supplying some of those irrigators that used to be on Deep Creek, and that's how we were able to rewater a Montana trout stream. So that's all I have. Thank you for all your time.
Thank you. Commissioner Rice, did you have anything more? Or not Commissioner Rice, Dr. Rice, hello.
No, that's all we have for the presentation. Of course, we have several staff here for questions. We've got both the current Canyon Ferry biologist and the former Canyon Ferry biologist. And we've got the managers for both Region 3 and Region 4 if there's questions. And of course, we've got Ron Spoon. So lots of information here in the room.
Okay, thank you. Like I said before, I'm going to let the other two presenters go, and then we'll start with questions after that. So, Mr. Elliott, if you would go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. And good to be with you all. I was just up in your neck of the woods, Madam Chair, for DNRC meetings in Glasgow, and it was great to see the amount of rain and the green grass that is up there this year. Quite a change from years past. So good to be all across the state. Happy to be here tonight to talk about this specific regulation. I will try to be fairly brief with you all because I think many of you in the past iteration of the consideration by the commission of this regulation had heard where we as Trout Unlimited are in this regulation proposal. But to start, I would say a couple of things. One, being at the scoping meetings, and I was happy to be in Bozeman for the scoping meeting there, and also in the Townsend meeting. A couple of things that came to mind out of that. One was sort of the boundary question and whether or not we choose the Highway 287 bridge. And I would propose sort of setting that aside. And I think Mr. Spoon alluded to this. I think there is some confusion about whether or not that bridge will be the best place. But I think, as we have done in many other places, found ample opportunity to sit down as anglers and sort of hash out what we think collectively could work and offer recommendations. So I don't want to get hung up on the boundary. I want to speak more specifically to the walleye harvest limit, and a couple of things come to mind. One is, I think by all accounts, you see a very robust walleye fishery within the Canyon Ferry system, as Mr. Spoon has alluded now, because of forage and because of just plain space. Many of those fish are moving up into the river system, which is understandable. And I don't think that the Trout Unlimited position is that there isn't a space for a walleye in that river. But we do recognize that the Upper Missouri Reservoir Management Plan, through a lot of collaborative work, and I think I do want to extend my hand to the good work between our organization and Walleyes Unlimited to try to come to compromise through those processes. But the plan does make room and identify the importance of the trout fishery in the river system. So that has set up a bit of a conflict here. And I think that what the commission did 2 years ago, or might have been a year ago now, in terms of asking the department to go back to the drawing board with some research, was a smart move. And I think the proposal that comes now is better informed. It has better data to substantiate it. We certainly have stood in support of the proposal because of a robust population, because of the predation that is occurring within the river. We think that the standard district regulation makes a lot of sense. So I would start by saying that we support the proposal as drafted by the department. Through the process of the regulation scoping, public meetings, and my conversation sort of afterwards and on the side with some folks from the walleye crowd and Walleyes Unlimited, there was an ask to try to be a little bit more targeted and identify more clearly what our core issue was. And I think generally we have concern about the sort of competition between the two species in the entire river system. But if I had to pick what was sort of the biggest burr in the saddle, it would be the predation of walleye on out-migrating juvenile trout from those really important tributaries. Deep Creek is one of them. There are others, but Deep Creek is a perfect example with those mitigation dollars where we've spent a lot of resources to improving the production and recruitment of trout. As those fish are coming out and they are running straight into a gauntlet of very hungry walleye, a robust number of them, that's where we have the specific concern. So in that spirit, I tried to draft a proposal that could be an amendment that would be a little bit more targeted, specifically around focused harvest at the mouths of those tributaries, You'll see it in our comments. I don't know how deep we want to dig into it today, but that was the genesis of why we offered a counter proposal. It was really trying to be more specific about what our core concern was, and it really is about the predation of those out-migrating juvenile fish to support the river system. So anyways, that's a little bit. I know that I'm at my time. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Appreciate any conversation or questions folks might have. But thank you, Madam Chair.
Actually, he doesn't start the time until after you kind of did your introduction, so you do have close to a minute left if you have any further.
I am good.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So, Mr. Harada, I will let you go next. 5 minutes, and then we'll start questions after that.
Okay, well, thank you, Madam Chair, and other commissioners that are present. And, hello to the other folks out there. Thanks, Clayton. And Clayton and I have tried to possibly work on some things together, and certainly his proposal was not a surprise. He did share that. But I would like to start by saying, Walleyes Unlimited of Montana is adamantly opposed to that proposed change. And I'm not sure that I've ever saw the data that reflects high numbers of walleye being or trout being eaten by the walleye. And whereas going from a 10 fish limit with one fish over 15 inches down to a 5 fish limit with no size regulations how is that going to improve the predation of these walleye, this robust population? I'm not sure robust is necessarily the right term, but I've never saw where this proposal is necessarily going to lessen any of the impact the walleye are making in the river. And the big thing is, I guess the biggest thing that Walleyes Unlimited is looking at is presently Canyon Ferry walleye fishing is improving slowly as far as getting a larger size of walleye, catchable walleye, harvestable walleye in the reservoir. And by doing the proposed regulation change, that's only going to harm that slightly improving walleye size in the reservoir. And again, the data that I guess I've done some research on, provided I didn't see the data that Mr. Spoon showed from 2024, the last three slides. But everything else does not support the fact that the walleye are indeed causing any major issues with that trout population in that stretch of river. I also we see, I guess, enforcement issues where people could put in it the silos or cottonwood, go up the river and have a different regulation than they have fishing in the reservoir. So there's a lot of things that don't seem to make sense biologically or as far as an enforcement issue. And, I guess it appears that a lot of the rainbow and brown trout goals are already being achieved. So I don't see again where this regulation change is going to behoove anything. And I don't know what my time limit is, but Lance and Dale are also standing by if there's anything that they would like to add, if I have any time left. But I would just like to close with, the river management plan also specifies that the FWP needs to consider impacts on the reservoir. Well, and again, in our opinion, that's only going to have a detrimental effect on the reservoir fishery by implementing this particular proposed change. And with that, thank you for hearing me out. And again, I'm not sure if Dale or Lance has anything to add if I have any time left.
So what I will do is if a question comes up and you think that either one of them would be better to answer it, then I will allow you to let them answer that question. We'll just do it that way. That works.
That sounds perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so commissioners that are on, any questions? I guess the reason that I asked to have this is because this is the third year in a row where we don't accept what the fisheries suggests, and then they come back with similar things every year. And so this is why I want to discuss it before we actually have it on the agenda. Because I'm not holding that against fisheries. I know that you're following the plan. And I don't think that the Dustin is on this, but I mean, if we have to give direction, I think, to FWP to do it differently, or we will be, if that's our choice, or we'll be back to this same situation every single year, unless the plan is different. So that's kind of why I put this together, just more information. And so I would really like to see some questions from the commission.
Chair Robinson, with your pleasure, I can address that a little bit. So just as a reminder to everyone, the last time a regulation was brought to the commission for this stretch, there wasn't a decision one way or the other. There wasn't any action taken. The director's not on, he's traveling right now, but we did discuss it, and his interpretation is we're following what the management plans tell us, and it's hard for us not to bring something that specifically addresses a management plan until we have clear direction. So we're in this little bit of a unknown area right now. And we certainly can appreciate the frustration of a recurring issue, but there really hasn't been anything that's changed to give us better direction.
Sure. And that I'm sure you said it way better. That is exactly what I meant. And no action actually is an action. Last time we just didn't go with what the recommendation was. So Commissioner Lane, I see your hand is up.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a few, I guess, first of all, more of a clarification issue for Mr. Spoon. You may have explained this and I just missed it, but are the fish able to get above Toston Dam, or is that just like you said, a flat out boundary? I guess that's my first question.
Commissioner Lane, no, they're not able to get above that dam, to our knowledge. We've never seen any evidence that they can get over that dam.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that. And then also, if I saw your data correctly, it didn't look like you're seeing much predation from the walleye with trout. Is that correct?
Mr. Lane, our 74 samples that we collected last year only had 5 trout in the samples that could be identified.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Lane, I'll add a nuance to that. Mr. Spoon indicated that could be identified. One of the challenges we have here is with the size of the trout that the walleye are potentially consuming, they're degrading very fast, which makes it hard for us to identify them to species. So like Mr. Spoon says during the presentation, they could end up in the unidentified or other category, or even be to the point of digestion. So it's a little bit of a nuance. What we do know is the predator, the walleye as a predator dominates the fishery at a large amount. And we know they're eating something, some other fish.
All right, thank you, Dr. Rice and Mr. Spoon.
Commissioner Brooke, if you'd like to go.
Yes, I had a question for Mr. Harada. You said in your presentation that increasing the harvest on walleye in the stretch of river is not going to have the affected outcome on trout. And I was just wondering where's your data on that?
Well, the limit actually isn't being in the proposal is not to increase the limit. It's to do away with the 1/15-inch regulation that's present in Canyon Ferry and in that stretch of river now. But I guess looking at the data, and one being that essentially there was only 5 recognizable trout in the stomachs of the walleye, why reducing the number from 10 to 5 with no size limit? I mean, I'm sure a 8-inch walleye can probably consume a tiny little less than 1-year-old trout very easily. So I guess my question is, where is the data that supports the 5-fish limit as opposed to a 10-fish limit, was my point.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and a follow-up question. We were talking about Fish, Wildlife and Parks managing the trout fishery so that to not impair or hurt the reservoir fishery. So are you saying that by taking 5 of any size affects the ability to have trophy size walleye in the reservoir? Is that the point?
The point is more taking the larger walleye with no size limit is going to affect, because they migrate back and forth from the river as the FWP agrees. But presently, the size of the walleye is slowly increasing in Canyon Ferry at a much more desirable size. But by doing away with the 1/15 inches, we feel that would really hamper the present slow improvement at Canyon Ferry. Does that answer your question?
It does. Yeah, I was trying to figure out the angle here of why this is so important. And it's because you want trophy walleye in the reservoir.
Not necessarily just trophy, but more catchable, harvestable size. You know, presently, for a long time, the walleye were all almost under 14 inches. You know, and it was difficult to catch even a nice eating size walleye that may be in that 16 to 22 inch size, a real desirable, I guess, size walleye.
So,
okay, I have one more question for Dr. Rice. When you guys were going, or Ron Spoon, when you guys were going through the slideshow, and you showed the little piece of river as a blue ribbon fishery, are walleye considered blue ribbon fishery potential?
Chair Robinson, Commissioner Brooke, no, the blue ribbon designation was meant as a priority river that should be protected for wild trout. It was originally related to a water protection issue. It's not currently an official designation, but it is still commonly used to indicate a quality wild trout fishery, specifically trout. So no, not walleye, sorry.
One more question then. So then you had the other graph that showed the wild trout population 25, 30 years ago that was bigger, and then it declined, and then you just dropped the standard down so that it was a lower population goal or objective. I don't know, the little blue line that's on the bottom. So where did we go from not managing it for a blue ribbon to just having this bare minimal population? How did that happen?
Chair Robinson, Commissioner Brooke, that's a good question. We're actually going to bring that slide back up, and I'll allow Mr. Spoon to explain it more once we get it up. The part I will say to sort of lead into what Mr. Spoon is going to say is, if you see the red line there that goes through the blue bars, so the red line is the current, what we call brown trout goal that's in the management plan for brown trout in that area over it. We don't take 1 year, we sort of look at a trend. You know, we always say 1 year does not really give us a trend. And that is that red line is 0.4 fish per minute of electrofishing. We made a mistake in the plan by not properly describing what that is. It's not necessarily a goal. If you look at the red dots, that's where the population numbers were, which are number of fish per mile. We currently do not have enough brown trout in the system to give you a population estimate in number of fish per mile. Really what that red dotted line does is we're trying to maintain a level of brown trout in the system, so as if we are able to improve the system through water, through better spawning habitat, more connectivity. And Mr. Spoon spoke about that with the Deep Creek project. Our hope is we can start bringing those brown trout back. So, but let me turn to Mr. Spoon, who can probably do a better job than I did.
I just, for 1 sec, could you also talk about what how the goal is going to be met by reducing the number, reducing the limit, but increasing the size, but with a reduced number, after you speak to that too, please?
Chair Robinson, this is Ron Spoon again. Well, you give me 2 questions, that will hang me up almost every time. But Eileen, the lonesome mistake we made when we wrote this plan, it was you see a pretty low goal, and we had kind of resigned to the fact that we weren't maybe going to be able to recover that fishery to what it used to be, and so we didn't even include those numbers with population estimates in a lot of our documents, and the people correctly looked at it and said, "You seem like you're doing fine." And so what we're trying to do tonight was to try to correct an error basically I made in the last plan, which is we set a very low bar. We just wanted to be able to hang on to that fishery at that time. And so then your question about the regulations and how they might affect this, you know, if you look at the information where there's a 10 fish limit, you only can allow 1/15. That is one set of angling experience. Another is where you have just a central district standard that we proposed because we had no walleye goal to move them to. There was no data to tell us that walleye should either be increased or decreased. It was just the central district standard, which was direction that we had. And we weren't really thinking about brown trout when we recommended that during the scoping process. But realistically, I don't think it will make a very large difference for the brown trout fishery to be either of those two regulations. They don't differ a large amount.
Commissioner Tabor, you have a question?
Well, first of all, before I get into my questions, I think that Lance wanted to probably clarify an answer that was given. So can Lance go ahead and make your clarification before I get into my line of questioning?
Thank you very much. I just wanted to go back to, I can't remember the commissioner's name. I apologize. But she was asking about the goals in the lake versus the goals in the rivers. So the PSD, the proportional stock densities, so basically for walleye in the reservoir is not being met. So the walleye, basically in the management plan for the reservoir, the goals are not being met. And if you are not meeting the goals in the reservoir and you do some in the river that's going to hurt those goals, that's what Steve was trying to say. So the goals for walleye are not being met in the reservoir. They are not completely overpopulated. As Ron said, that's the first time we have heard that. It was kind of, I don't know, I've been in a lot of these meetings and I've never seen the anti-walleye presentation until tonight, but we did see it tonight. So yeah, the PSD for the walleye is not being met in the reservoir. The brown trout goals are being met in the river, and as Ron said, this isn't really going to change the brown trout. Me and Mike talked a lot. He's in the FWP meeting right now, and it's water temperature causing the brown trout issues more than it is walleye. So that's just what I wanted to add. Go ahead, Tabor, Commissioner Tabor.
Yeah, thanks. So a couple of different things to try to understand and characterize this, because I get back to, I'm trying to zoom in on what problem we're trying to solve. So I got to first start with for the plan. So if I understand the overall statewide fishery management plan, there's a spirit and a theme that says we want to do those things to protect the wild trout fishery. And so by logic, you'd say, okay, so then in this case, we have brown trout here. We had a historical high. But one of the things you indicated right up front is that the brown trout aren't any more endemic to this river than the walleye are. So is it really correct to call them wild trout?
Chair Robinson, Vice Chair Tabor. Yeah, I will answer that. So first of all, it's a little confusing because there are two management plans in play here. There's the broad statewide fish management plan that Vice Chair Tabor mentioned. There's also the Upper Missouri Reservoir / River Management Plan. For those water bodies that need more specific direction, we have more details planned. So in this case, the statewide management plan defers to the smaller scale local plan. And specifically within that plan, it gives us very clear direction for the priorities of either the reservoirs or the river sections. So what the current Upper Missouri River / Reservoir plan says is the priority for fisheries management from Toston Dam to Canyon Ferry is wild trout management. And then it also recognizes the importance of walleye, burbot, and other species as an important part of the fishery. So when talking about wild trout, to answer your question, so just to give an example of something that the commission recently acted on, the Swan River example where you took action on a regulation related to rainbow trout. Those rainbow trout are also not native to that system, as are brown trout here, not native, but both are very important to the system as wild trout. So when we talk about wild trout, it's a fish, or any wild fish, it's a fish that completes its entire life cycle in the wild. So in both of these situations, and I mentioned the swan because I know how familiar you are with it, the brown trout are sort of equivalent to the rainbows in the Swan River. They complete their entire life cycle in that area. So that's where the management plan, the statewide management plan, gives us more direction on how to promote and manage for wild trout, which is quality habitat, connected systems, spawning areas, quality of water. You had mentioned temperature, or somebody had mentioned temperature. Water flow is certainly an issue too. And Mr. Spoon spoke about all the work that's being done on the spawning tributaries to provide more connection for those tributaries, as well as more water in general in the system. So the other thing, we appreciated the clarification from Mr. Kresge on the goal for Canyon Ferry. And we did want to clarify a little bit on that. There's actually two parts to that goal. One is the PSD, which Mr. Kresge correctly referenced as in Canyon Ferry that is currently not being met. However, the abundance for walleye, that goal is 6.8 per net, and that is currently being met. So it's a nuance, but it's just to add that sort of, the abundance obviously is the number of the fish. The PSD more talks about the catchable quality of the fishery.
Madam Chair.
Did I answer your question? Oh, hopefully
No,
I
you
answered
didn't.
your question.
You did and you didn't, and so I want to go back for a clarification, because in the instance of using the Swan River, the management plan was really in protection of cutthroat, so the assault was going to be on the rainbow to protect the cutthroat. And it was the cutthroat that was the endemic trout that was in the Swan River. In this case, what we have is a brown trout that's not there and walleye that wasn't there. So they're both, I guess, introduced at one point or another. So I get now how we kick down from the state level down to the site specific plan. But I guess I'll ask the same question that I did when it came to the swan, and that is, so part of it is trying to mitigate whatever you think might be causing the decline in population, although it appears that the population is somewhat stabilized. But then the other piece of it is there anything in the plan or trying to increase the numbers and get them back up to the, other than this measure that you're suggesting for walleye? So is there going to be more reintroduction? Is there going to be any kind of bringing more fish in and trying to build up a more robust population to get the numbers back up that way? Or is our only strategy right now or tactic for this whole fishery is to just focus on the impact potentially that the walleye are having on the brown trout?
Yeah, Chair Robinson, Vice Chair Tabor, those are all good questions. I'll address the river part, but I'm going to ask the Region 4 staff to talk more about management actions for the reservoir. So on the river, you asked what else we're doing. Our primary focus for the river is habitat, water reinstatement. Mr. Spoon mentioned the $2 million that have been spent on Deep Creek. That was a lengthy project that involved several landowners in the area. It was a huge success to the credit of both Mr. Spoon and the local landowners to get that Deep Creek system literally flowing with water and reconnected as a spawning area for brown trout. And the Deep Creek screw trap that Mr. Spoon showed, that was the tool that we used to demonstrate that. Some of the other work is going on by our graduate student that's looking at the impacts of the Tiber Dam, and general habitat improvement for spawning. What Mr. Spoon mentioned about the regulations not necessarily having that much impact to improve the brown trout is true, but what our approach is we're trying to literally use every tool we can to give the brown trout a good opportunity to sustain in order to survive and enhance, hopefully, when these habitat projects really kick in and we get more recruitment to the system for the brown trout. The other part of your question that I wanted to address was you had mentioned the assault, your words, the assault on the rainbow trout to protect the cutthroat in Swan River. I wanted to be clear that we are in no way promoting suppression of walleye. We're looking at a very modest regulation, which is the standard for the entire Eastern District, which is 5 walleye daily, 10 in possession. So, and it's the reason it's the Eastern District is because it's a very modest, sorry, Eastern, I meant Central. Just forgot about 2/3 of the state. The Central District standard is very modest. And so that's where we're purposely wanting to recognize the importance of walleye while trying to also balance an important trout fishery and a very complicated system where a top predator is making up about 70% of the fishery assemblage, which is not a balanced system, which makes it very hard for us to manage. So we're not, it looks like we're targeting just the walleye regulation because that's what you hear from us, but our approach is actually far broader than that. We've got a lot more activities going on. They're just not activities that we bring in front of the commission. And then I'll ask someone from Region 4 to address the question about Canyon Ferry management and what we're doing to address the goals for walleye there. Who would be best to take that?
I'm going to defer this probably to Adam Strainer, being the former biologist, knows the reservoir the best.
Chair Robinson, Commissioner Tabor, Adam Strainer. So I think the best way, I think one of the things that keeps coming up is, the notion of how will potential regulation changes in the river affect the reservoir. And almost everybody on this call tonight recognizes that we've got a longstanding management plan, water body specific plan in place that I know Dale Gilbert, who's on the phone tonight, has taken part in developing over the years, as well as Mr. Kresge on the line. The one thing that's certain is we don't make our management decisions in a vacuum. And one particular survey, which we hang our hat on, which is what helps drive our management objectives and directions, is our fall gill netting survey. That's 15 nets across the reservoir each fall. And that is what directs whether or not we're within management plan goals for both abundance and PSDs, or the general size of fish. Our goal is to have, hitting the right mark is the right abundance of fish, which is between 5 and 7 per net, as well as trying to get the right plumpness of fish in the system, or a good, healthy array of fish in the system. And one thing that consistently comes up is the notion that, you know, harvest of more fish over 15 in the river may affect the population. And we've always said, if we saw that based on our fall surveys, we would in turn make management recommendations. So if we saw the fact that more increase of harvest of fish larger than 15 in the river is indeed potentially affecting the reservoir, we would in turn make a regulation recommendation. And this is all within the sideboards and built within the plan, so that we have a standardized survey to make these types of decisions.
I just do one more follow-up, Madam Chair, because it's pertinent to this train of thought. So the part I'm trying to seek an understanding is, so it sounds like we have quite specific goals on the reservoir. There is connectivity and a cause and effect of the fish coming back and forth from the river to the reservoir. And so to me, there seems to be some logic that if we're falling short of our goal in the reservoir, that the allowance of taking of the bigger fish in the river would be potentially contributory to us never being able to reach our goal in the reservoir. I mean, I follow the logic there. I don't know if the science supports it, but I guess the other piece that I'd want to know is, do we know much about the age class or the size or the impact of size? I think we heard Mr. Arata say, you know, who is eating little guys? And you know, there had to be a particular reason why you're recommending that we take more big fish. I guess the assumption there, or it seems implied, is the biggest fish are the biggest culprit for taking the little fish that are coming out of those tributaries. And I guess, is there something that we have statistically or biologically that proves that to be the case, that informed that decision of you removing the size limit? Because it does seem to be in contrast. I mean, if we want to grow the fish size, that's a stated goal in the reservoir, and yet we're doing the very opposite thing on the river, which feeds into, to me, there's a kind of a break in logic as to why we would do that, unless you're saying, well, it's unequivocal. The larger the fish, the bigger the belly full of all the stuff that we don't want them to eat, which is the little brown trout. So sorry to put it in my terms. I'm obviously not a biologist, but it helps me understand the logic of how you're getting to your decisions and your recommendations.
No, thanks. All great questions. Sorry, Chair Robinson, Vice Chair Tabor. So we've got a couple of things here to address. One is the contribution or the impact of what happens on the river to the reservoir population. The other part of it was the size distribution data, so for the river. So we'll take the first part, the river connection to the reservoir. So again, I'm going to probably go to Mr. Strainer to address that. So basically the issue we need to address is how that part of the river interrelates with the reservoir as a whole.
Thank you, Chair Robinson, Commissioner Tabor. So the best information we currently have is that indeed the population of walleye is the same between the river upstream and within Canyon Ferry proper. One of the unknowns we have right now is the actual size of the population that makes the migratory move into the river. And so for us to sit here today and say, you know, we're comparing apples and apples, is very difficult because frankly, we do not know that answer. We don't know the proportion of the walleye migration that is, you know, a proportion of the population that goes into the river. We don't know if it's 10% or if it's 50%. That is one thing that I think our agency will look at over the coming years. And so the best information we currently have is we think it's about 10% of the population, roughly speaking. And so for us to say that, you know, additional harvest on larger fish in the river, again, goes back to my answer the previous time here is we really don't know, but again, we would be able to manage it through that standardized survey. And so if we saw changes in the population and thought for a second that it was somehow correlated, we would consider, speaking with Ron and his staff about talking about a regulation change if we were to in fact go forward with a proposal similar to what we have.
And then Vice Chair Tabor, to answer sort of the second part of your question related to that size distribution within the river, I'm going to turn that over to Mr. Spoon, and we'll bring up some charts again. Do we have it in the presentation or?
Yeah, the chart, Commissioner Robinson, Chair Robinson, Commissioners, well, one of the charts I showed earlier was how many people, what percentage of people catch certain numbers. There's that one Creel slide right there. And so this is, based on not a lot, but almost 300 interviews last year. And you see that the majority of people.
Can you share that screen again, Dr. Rice?
Sorry, we can see it on our side. We forgot to hit the share button.
So again, this was the Creel last year, and the point that I make, and it's fairly general meat and potatoes type of point, is most people catch less than 5 fish. And so if you have a 5 fish limit or a 10 fish limit, you don't change things too much. But when you only allow them to keep 1 over 15 inches, as was referred to the eating size, I picture going out with my grandkids and we get a couple of 16 inchers, and that's about right for a meal. We have to limit our harvest on that size. We're not talking trophies. It's just a little more desirable eating size. And the Central District standard that I like about it, it just says, go fishing. We're staying out of your way. This is a modest proposal. This is our standard statewide proposal. We're not trying to move walleye into larger or smaller or more or less. Just go fishing and don't bring a ruler with you, and have your own family determine whether you like to release the big ones or how you like to do business. But we shouldn't, in my opinion, let this walleye regulation instruct how people use that river. And that's a little bit off topic. I probably got a dirty look, but it's especially with my history of when the walleye angler said, don't remove fish from the system. We do it. We like eating our fish. We're not like the trout people. And now to see where we're limiting those folks by only allowing 1 decent sized fish to take home with them just doesn't make common sense in my non-biologist opinion, which is outside the lane of what I'm supposed to be doing right now. But I wanted to try to get to some sort of discussion of why this 10 versus 5 limit is such a large issue. I don't understand it personally. That's sorry for being so honest.
Commissioner Lane's had his hand up for a while. I'm gonna let him jump in and see what his question is.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mine just a simple question. So when I saw on a previous graph that you had up there that in 2019, there was a pretty big uptick in the brown trout. Do we know what caused that?
Commissioner Lee, that's a perfect example. I'm so glad you saw that. We mentioned in those catch per effort graphs, it's fish per minute. And when there's small changes each year, we encourage people not to worry about it. It's when you see the trend that we start to get concerned. And so that was an odd thing that we cannot explain why that was so large. And similarly, that really large group of walleye that we've seen this year, where we wanted to let you know that's what the data shows. that's moving into the river. But next year it could be right back at where we're at. And so we try not to do anything with 1 year's piece of information.
So there was no environmental, I mean, I'm sure you keep track of what the water temperatures were and no regulation changes or anything like that that would have influenced that. Is that correct?
Nothing that jumped out to us about a particular year that would have caused that.
Okay, thank you.
Just, oh, sorry, Chair. I wanted to add one comment about the regulation discussion on, you know, why 5, not 10. Mr. Spoon did a great discussion on why not the size limit. But one thing I wanted to point out, the reason why we like going to the Central District Standard is because it reduces the number of walleye for harvest, literally from 10 down to 5. And the reason we like that is because it does recognize walleye as an important part of the fishery. So that was sort of our way to again, bring a modest regulation. If we wanted to be more aggressive and do a suppression, it'd be much easier to promote something like Trout Unlimited is, where we target congregations of fish. So that we hadn't mentioned that, and that was an important part of that regulation discussion. So just there are other options we could do. You know, we have. I'm not sure if everyone caught it, but previous versions of the management plan did specifically direct for suppression of walleye. It no longer does that. So we're trying to recognize that, you know, within this, you know, so we're not recommending a 20 fish limit, for example, or what Trout Unlimited is asking for.
Commissioner Brooke, did you have a question?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. Clayton, you had mentioned that you had met with the walleye group and that there was some talk about targeting these predators in the Deep Creek or some of the tributaries where there's spawning going on. And I was just wondering, you know, is that ongoing? Is it done? Is it dead in the water, so to speak? Where are you with that?
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair, Commissioner Brooke. I would characterize our conversations as informal. I know that Steve and I have emailed back and forth. I've talked with a number of folks, both in the Townsend meeting and the Bozeman meeting, sort of afterwards on the side. We haven't sat down in a formal way. I'm happy to do that. But I would, I mean, I think it's clear, and no disrespect, I did not expect Walleyes Unlimited to support our proposal. But I don't know if there's a lot of appetite to go there. I'm happy to continue to meet with them and work on them. I would say that I think the frustration on our end, and it goes to Commissioner Tabor's line of questions, what else are we doing besides going after walleye? And from a Trout Unlimited perspective, we're working with FWP and DNRC and a ton of other partners to tackle all of these other variables, whether it's habitat, flow and water leasing, connection, and the great work that Colton Pipinich is doing to try to understand the barriers within the system if we can move fish around Tossin. So we are tackling all of these other things, but at the end of the day, until you address the predator making up 70% of the fish assemblage, I think all of that work becomes slightly like pushing a boulder uphill. So I look forward. I'm happy to meet with Walleyes Unlimited and continue the dialogue. I understand that they're not in support of my proposal. I did not necessarily expect them to be, but I'm always welcome. Steve and I have worked really well together. We appreciate sitting down and talking, and perhaps there's more path forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Tabor.
So the last comment that you made, Dr. Rice, really did confuse me now, because if 10 is better than 5 and our goal is to try to mitigate the impact, I mean, now I really don't follow the logic. And then also the question I had the last time as it related to, I think we answered the question as to whether the size of the fish going into the reservoir may or may not be impacted on what we do on the river. It sounds like, as best we can tell, about 10% of the population of the river potentially gets into the reservoir. So if you're having some kind of impact on size on the river, I think your conclusion is that it'll have a negligible impact on trying to reach the goal in the reservoir to get your walleye bigger. That seems to be the extension of your logic as to why you would put a size limit or lift any size limit on the river. But that last comment of going from 10 to 5 was a throw out to the walleye people. That just, it's confusing to me. So but somebody asked, it was either Dr. Smith, somebody asked a great question. And so I'll get back to what I first asked. And I know that Dale's had his hand up and maybe we'll start with him, but I want you to manage it, Madam Chair. But I guess I'd really like to ask, you know, what is the real problem here? Because I mean, it sounds like the department really is trying hard to not take much away. It has to do something. It believes it has to do something. We don't have the greatest data to work off of. It believes it has to do something. It's trying to be very moderate in its approach. I mean, what could the walleye people live with? You know, what is it that you specifically want? Do you want it left the same? Because the other benefit is, and I think this was a thrust that the previous director and certainly the current directors come up, but the more consistency we tend to have across regulations, the easier it is for people to comply and do all those things. So if we have a walleye standard for all of central Montana, and this is the only exception, and so this also achieves that, I could see some logic there. But to me, I'm a little lost as to why we're bickering about the numbers we're bickering about. I mean, if we had a big chasm that was 20 feet, 20 fish different, I'd understand that. But this seems pretty. So help me understand, maybe, and Madam Chair, I'll leave it to you as to how you want to monitor that dialogue. But I'd like to hear from all the various parties because I'm a little stumped on it.
So I agree, and that is why I had this meeting. We look at this exact same thing every single year, and I am so confused as to why they ask for the change. I don't think I've heard anything yet that really truly convinces me that the change that's being asked for is accomplishing anything. But so anyway, I don't know if Mr. Gilberty he's not on video, so I don't know if you're still on there. I will I'm gonna let actually, let me see.
Lance has got his hand up.
I'm still here. Sorry.
Okay, go ahead, and I will let you have a little bit of time.
Thank you, Madam
Chair. Madam Chair, real quick, I had a 6:30 and I've got a 10-minute drive, so I've got to get going, but good discussion, and I'm gonna have to jump off.
Okay, thank you. And
Madam Chair.
Okay.
This is Dale. Is that okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just clarify a couple of things. You know, I think bottom line, you know, I've been involved with the management committee in this plan for decades, literally. And I think ultimately the goal that both TU and Walleye Unlimited have is to have a quality multi-species fishery. That's what we all want. We want a good trout fishery. We want a good walleye fishery. The problem with what's being proposed, and to clarify a couple of points, is that this proposed action reduces the incentive for anglers in the river to keep the smaller fish, which is what we're trying to do to keep the reasonable abundance numbers in check on the reservoir. And it also increases the harvest 5 times of the 15-inch and quality fish, which will reduce those fish being available to the anglers in the reservoir. And in fact, the facts are that based on the telemetry study that was done in 2015, and based on the radio or the tags that the fish in the river are tagged every year since 2015, of the tag returns that they've gotten back, nearly 38% of those tag returns come from fish that anglers report catching in the reservoir. So for the department to tell me that making this change in the river is not going to impact the reservoir it just doesn't make sense. You know, if you look at the management plan, page 16 of the management plan says three basic things as far as the river sections. One of them is just to consider the adjacent reservoir strategies, goals, and objectives, et cetera, regulations when implementing river management actions. It says to monitor and determine the impact of the walleye on the trout and to make additional recommendations or changes as needed. And bottom line, this conflicts directly with what's going on the reservoir because it does removes the quality of fish that are not going to be available. It increases the number of small fish that are going to create more small fish in greater reasonable numbers. And then as far as having a monitoring to determine an impact on the trout, we asked for that the last year, and they went ahead and did that with a diet analysis, and the sheet I've got shows four fish out of the 74 fish had evidence of trout or salmonoids, which could be trout or whitefish, I understand. And out of those, 4.9% by composition was actually the trout or the salmon. So 95% of what those fish are eating are something other than trout. So it's really hard for me and most of the other people to buy that walleyes are adversely impacting the trout in that river. In fact, looking at the 2015 to 2023 charts on catch per unit efforts for both rainbow and trout, they've been met or exceeded. In fact, they're met or exceeded for 2023, and 60% of the time over those past 5 years, they've actually exceeded the goals. So what are they trying to fix with the trout fishery? I mean, it doesn't add up and it doesn't make sense, and that's what's causing a lot of frustration. And thank you very much. I'm sorry for rambling on, but it's really important, I think, that we overall try to do what we can and have a quality multi-species fishery that everybody be as happy as they can.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I think I am going to, that was Mr. Gilbert. I'm going to let everyone speak, and it's more like closing remarks unless there are some more questions from the commission. So anyway, Mr. Kresge, if you want to just kind of wrap up with what you have kind of heard, I guess, tonight and what you would like us to know.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, just the simplifying the regulations doesn't make sense when there is no walleye regulation within, I don't know how many miles of Canyon Ferry that would be the same as the new regulation proposal. So they're not actually simplifying anything. I just wanted to answer that. So it's actually going to complicate the Upper Missouri drastically because that's going to be the special regulation for that river versus the same as everywhere else, which Holter is different, but the near regulations, it would actually complicate, not simplify. So, I mean, it's the same fish as the lake that go into the river. And I guess just the overall thought process with everybody since the get-go has been that it's the same fish, manage them the same in both places. You know, take higher numbers of little fish because that's what we have. Leave the bigger fish because that's what we don't have. Both places, keep them the same. And that's kind of just all we're asking for. And I just really urge the commission to make a decision on this. None of us want to do this for a fourth year. This is the third year in a row. We're all sitting here. We all have other things we'd rather be doing, I'm sure. Just make a decision. At the next management plan, if this thing something gets changed and then it can be reassessed. But at this point, let's make a decision. Either we're going to say, yeah, we can do whatever we want with the walleye in the river, or no, let's keep them the same as a reservoir until the next management plan. Let's not keep beating the dead horse and just do this over and over every year. So I'm just asking for a decision. I really hope that it's what I like, but let's make a decision so we can all kind of move on and we don't have to continue doing this every single year until the management plan expires. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Harada?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had to unmute there. And I would just kind of like to concur with what Lance just said, but adding an additional regulation to that stretch of river that's different than Canyon Ferry makes no sense whatsoever. And cutting the limit from 10 to 5 makes no sense whatsoever either. in our opinion, my opinion. So leave the regulation as is. It's my recommendation. Thank you very much.
Mr. Elliott, I would like to hear from you, just kind of.
Yes.
Yep, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and appreciate the good dialogue. I thought it was a constructive conversation. I mean, I'm going to tread very carefully because I don't like to get into an area that I'm uncomfortable with, and generally wildlife policy I am, but I want to make a bit of an analogy in that if we were trying to manage a balanced system with deer and elk, and we had a 70% assemblage of predators, we would be having a serious conversation about predator management. And I think in this system, in a fish context, we have been, those of us who are working on supporting and maintaining a wild trout fishery have been pushing a lot of rocks up the hill in a variety of places and made huge investments and strides in places like Deep Creek. And there's more work to be done, but it's hard to continue to do that without dealing with the elephant in the room, which is 70% assemblage of predators. And so we can continue to support and push recruitment up in the system, but until we're dealing with the predator, we do think that the proposal made by the department gets us to addressing that problem by taking care of some of those larger fish that are found in the screw trap and otherwise. So I would support the department's proposal. I think it's good. It's responsible. I think there's an ability to adaptively manage from there and to learn and to understand it. Certainly, I tried to put together another proposal that would be a little bit more targeted in the areas where I'm specifically concerned about, which is those tributary mouths. It does not sound like there's a lot of appetite from Walleyes Unlimited to look at that, and I understand that. I'm happy to continue to have conversations, but we've got to do something if we're going to have a and I agree with Mr. Gilbert. I think we all want to have happy anglers and happy walleye anglers and happy trout anglers. That's the goal here. But in this stretch of the system, what is happening today is not working from a trout standpoint. So I hope the commission will take some action. Happy to continue to work with folks on our proposal, but I don't want to say that our proposal is meant to say that we're opposed to what the department has said either. I think we would be firmly happy if the department proposal moved forward. So thank you all for your time today. I really do appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. I do have Dr. Rice. I guess I'm still a bit confused as to what the commission, if the commission chose to, what is the action that the commission could do that we are not revisiting this every single year? Do you have a I guess, do you have an answer for that?
Chair Robinson, I think the place where the department was left in a little bit of a gray area was when a proposal was brought for a regulation and no action was taken, and then we were asked to provide additional information. So we sort of still feel like we're trying to address what the management plan says. So that in terms of an action for the commission, I would say to follow process along with all of our fishing regulations. The time and place for that would be at the October commission meeting, when the entire package of regulations for 25 and 26 come in front of the commission. I wasn't sure if the department was going to get an opportunity to clarify or answer some or make a closing statement.
Yes. I just want to make sure that all
Okay.
that I see Commissioner Tabor has his hand up.
Okay.
Yep.
I defer to hearing the closing remarks by the department.
Okay, perfect. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, well, everything everything fisheries does, and you've heard me talk about this before, is directed by our management plan. With the statewide fisheries management plan being the overall umbrella plan for every basin within the state, and then there's those individual separate plans. I did want to clarify something that some of the walleye anglers mentioned was the goal for this stretch of the river is different from Canyon Ferry Reservoir. The goal for Canyon Ferry Reservoir is to maintain and manage a multi-species fishery with those specific species goals. That is not the same for the stretch of the river. The stretch of the river quite clearly says is to provide naturally reproducing brown and rainbow trout populations in the Missouri River and associated tributaries for recreational fishing opportunities, and to provide important spawning and rearing conditions from Toston Dam to Canyon Ferry. So I felt like that was an important clarification to make, to really emphasize the goals between the river and the reservoir are different. So then we come to the regulation. The discussion that goes back to how we got the current regulation of 10 daily with 1 over 15. The main reason we ended up there was to make it the same as the reservoir because of confusion from the public and from enforcement. With our discussions with our enforcement division, they see that as not being an issue. We do have several places where there's a reservoir or a lake with different regulations than an associated tributary river or stream. So all of that leads us to the question of what do we propose here? Again, for clarification, we are simplifying the regulations, which was our direction from the current director and the previous director, with the first direction to the staff being look at every water body in the state and justify why we cannot use the standard regulation. So that's how we keep coming back to the standard regulation of 5 walleye daily. It is a simplification because it removes an exception from the regulations. The reason the department likes the 5 versus the 10 is it reduces that harvest limit in half. So to us, it is giving credit to the walleye fishery and recognizing it as important by not going to a larger limit. And then just my final comment is we are wanting to be proactive here. There's been a lot of discussion over brown trout throughout the state. We are seeing declines in brown trout and other waters. We're putting a lot of effort into brown trout in the Southwest Montana and the Jefferson Basin. And Mr. Elliott spoke about predator management, and that is the tool that we're using here with the regulation. As we've mentioned, we could be a lot more aggressive, and the reason we're not is because we are literally giving a nod to the importance of walleye, understanding that currently the number 70% has been thrown out. It's actually 61% of the assemblage is walleye, still a very high number, which really is not a balanced fishery. So from a fisheries management perspective, that is how we're looking at it, is how to manage that assemblage with a very high percent of that assemblage being a predator, which is unbalanced. So that's our final closing remarks, and again, I appreciate everyone's time, and we're always happy to visit with anyone with more questions.
Sure. And this is not the end of the conversation. This is, we don't even have the complete commission here tonight, and this is recorded, I'm pretty sure. So hopefully they'll be able to listen to the conversations before we have it actually on our agenda. Are there any, I guess, Commissioner Tabor?
Yeah, so a couple things, knowing that we're probably gearing towards the October decision, that would at least help me and I think the other commissioners and add to the richness of the conversation as we move towards the decision. I heard quite a few different statistics coming from everybody on the call, including the department. So we don't really have a reconciliation of statistics, and that makes it particularly difficult because, you know, some of the walleye guys were reading off of reports and things that appear to have been published by the department. And so they're making reference to that. Certainly Mr. Elliott's making reference to other statistics. So it would help to get the key statistics across the board for a multi-year look. So we have the data to really understand what we're talking about. I know that the walleye is classified as a predator, but the thing I'm not seeing, and I just need more of an education on, and I don't think I really got the answer tonight, is the relationship between age class of the fish and what impact they have on the small fish. So key to this recommendation seems to be encouraging anglers to take more large fish. The pushback from the walleye population and, you know, folks are that we're really trying to go towards larger fish, especially in the reservoir, according to the plan. So I'll need information from, I assume, the department to help me understand what role do the big fish play. First of all, we call them a predator and they're a high population, but so far the statistics when we do the look in their bellies and all that don't really make them out to be the predator that they're accused to be. So we either need additional data to make that clearer, or somebody to explain why that is happening. I get the thing that they can dissolve within, you know, 24 hours. That's probably true of virtually any fish in any kind of survey we do. But that just tells me that maybe we didn't take enough samples or we didn't do it at the right time of year or whatever. So we could get better data to really understand their impact. Because I think most anybody looking at this from the outside in, if the only data point that we have to present this, that the walleyes are truly predators, is 4 out of the 74, that's kind of pretty weak data right now, you know. And so if we had years that show that the bellies are much more full and we just happen to have an off year for the one, then that would help me understand it. But where you demonstrated statistically across the board, where you had multiple years on everything else, we only have 1 year and one data point when it comes to what's in the bellies of those walleyes, which feels like incomplete data to help us really understand the nature of the impact the walleyes are having. So I think some of that information gathering will be really helpful as we move closer to the decision. I would also encourage, you know, both the parties to speak together. I think it's been a great discourse, and I understand that some of the public meetings were not as kind and friendly. And in particular, I was very disturbed to hear that there was personal attacks on anybody in FWP. That just is always going to be inappropriate and certainly doesn't convince any commissioner that I know to vote in favor when people are mistreated in the process. I think everybody has a common goal here to do the right thing, and we're just trying to work together. The thing I would like to see is maybe some element of what can work. I mean, I feel like the department is bending over backwards to try to acknowledge the importance of the fishery. Mr. Elliott has been well within the bounds of trying to offer something that works. So there's got to be something that the parties might be able to agree upon that would be really helpful, that we could all live with, to Mr. Kresge's point, so that we can once and for all put it to rest and then do it the way we're supposed to do. Let's give it a try for 2 years and see what the hell happens. We can always change it. It's not a life sentence. So let's start with something, see what the impact is, and then see where it takes us. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
Are there any questions from the commissioners? Okay. All right, well, I do have to take public comment for anyone who would like to comment on items that are not on the agenda. I don't want to lose anybody before we end the meeting though, but I do want to thank everyone for taking the time. It's really important that we have all the information that we need to make the right decision. And so I do appreciate you guys taking some time of your evening. And I do have one attendee who has their hand raised, and just a reminder that has to be an item that was not on the agenda.
Madam Chair, that speaker is Cameron Nisdell.
Okay.
And they should be on now. Go ahead, please, Cameron.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, and there is a 2-minute time limit, so go ahead.
Yeah. I have a question. Is carp management in this area something that is off topic for this meeting? Or is it something that falls within the Upper Missouri River Management Plan? Because I did not see anything regarding carp.
We're not discussing carp this evening.
Okay.
And
Because carp, if you look at carp in regards to my 2 minutes here, they are a major factor in any river and any system in the Midwest here, North Dakota. They eat a lot of fingerlings and everything like that. And FWP has not issued any studies on their impact in the river. I was just curious if FWP had any response to what the carp management plan may become in regards to eating trout out of the river.
my recommendation would be for you to reach out to FWP. I'm not allowing people to actually ask questions of FWP this evening. It's more just a comment period.
Yeah, I'm just bringing up as a spot of concern. We're talking about walleye, we're talking about trout. There's a million carp in the river. Why isn't that on the actual docket for what may be affecting trout or anything else in the river?
Again, I just recommend that you do official comments when that is on our agenda.
Okay, just
Thank
bringing
you.
it to everyone's attention.
Thank you. All right. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? The item that is not on the agenda.
Chair, we have no further public comment.
Okay. All right. Well, everyone have a good evening. And again, thank you so much and see you at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night, guys.
Yep.
Thanks
good
very
evening.
much.